All right, everybody, get ready. Because today we're going deep on habits. Those things that we do automatically without even thinking about them.
You know, habits are more than just brushing your teeth or grabbing coffee in the morning.
Yeah, for sure.
They're actually like these routines that are hardwired into our brains and they run on autopilot. And whether we realize it or not, they shape so much of our lives, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've got this habit. I've been trying to break it forever. Checking my phone right before I go to sleep.
Yeah.
I know it's really bad for my sleep, but I can't seem to stop. I just keep doing it over and over again. It's like my hand has a mind of its own, honestly.
Well, and that's a perfect example of what we call the habit loop, right?
Yeah.
There's this three-part cycle that happens. There's a cue, then there's the routine, and then there's the reward. And in your case, the cue is seeing your phone on that nightstand. Then the routine is you picking it up and checking all those notifications. And the reward, well, that's that little hit of dopamine you get from seeing something new.
I see. So dopamine is the reward in this whole equation?
Yeah.
I mean, is that why it's so hard to resist things like social media? Because it's basically like hitting that reward button in our brains over and over again.
You got it. It's all about that dopamine rush. And every time we get that little rush, it strengthens the connection in our brain between the cue and the routine. You know, it makes it even harder to resist the next time around.
So it's like I'm basically paving this neural pathway in my brain the more I repeat that same behavior.
Exactly. It's like walking the same path every single day. Eventually, it becomes so well-worn that it's the easiest path to take. But the good news is we can actually use this same process to our advantage. We can build good habits too.
Wait, so we can rewire our brains by repeating new behaviors.
That's the power of neuroplasticity. It's this amazing ability our brains have to change and adapt throughout our lives.
Wow, so that means I can literally change the physical structure of my brain just by building better habits.
Exactly. And it all starts with a part of the brain called the basal ganglia. It's like the habit center of the brain. And as you repeat a new behavior, the connections between neurons in that area strengthen.
And that process is what's called synaptic plasticity.
Precisely those tiny gaps between brain cells, the synapses, they become more efficient at transmitting signals. So it's like upgrading from a dirt road to a superhighway in your brain.
So every time I resist the urge to check my phone at night and I pick up a book, instead I'm essentially paving a new superhighway in my brain for that healthier behavior.
You got it. And with enough repetition, that new pathway becomes the default, the automatic choice.
I've heard that it takes 21 days to form a habit. Is that true?
You know that 21-day rule? It's a myth, unfortunately.
Oh, really?
It's a good starting point, I guess, but research actually suggests that it takes closer to 66 days on average for a new behavior to become automatic.
Wow, 66 days.
And even then, it can vary a lot depending on, the person and the complexity of the habit. But the key is to be patient and to focus on consistency over perfection.
So no magic number of days, just stick with it even when it's hard. Okay, so we've talked about the habit loop, the amazing neuroplasticity of our brains and the importance of consistency. But how do we actually put all this knowledge into action? What are some practical strategies for breaking bad habits and building good ones?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's where things get really interesting because breaking those ingrained patterns, it often takes more than just willpower. We need to dig a little deeper and look at those triggers, the routines and the rewards, and find ways to kind of strategically disrupt that cycle.
Okay, so willpower alone isn't enough. I can definitely attest to that.
Yeah.
So tell me more about these strategies. I'm ready to upgrade my habit toolkit.
Well, one really effective strategy is to focus on those cues, those triggers that set off the bad habit, and to try to replace them with healthier alternatives.
So like if I always snack while I'm watching TV, maybe I could swap out the bag of chips for a bowl of fruit or,
Yeah.
find something else to do during the commercials.
Exactly. It's all about consciously choosing a different response to that cue. You're essentially disrupting that automatic pattern.
Makes sense. But what about those habits where it's almost impossible to avoid the cue? Like if it's something that's just a part of your daily routine.
In those cases, instead of trying to eliminate the cue, we can actually modify the routine itself.
Okay.
Let's stick with your phone example.
Yeah.
You want to stop checking it before bed, but you always charge it on your nightstand, right?
No, that's my life.
So instead of reaching for your phone, you could have a book ready to grab, or you could even spend a few minutes meditating. The idea is you're still getting that relaxation reward, but you're doing it with a healthier behavior.
Okay, so it's like tricking my brain into taking the healthier path.
Exactly. It's all about being strategic, working with the habit loop.
I like that.
Another powerful technique is to think about your environment.
Okay.
Make it harder to engage in those bad habits and make it easier to engage in the good ones.
I've heard that making those small changes in your surroundings can make a big difference.
Oh, absolutely. If you're trying to eat healthier, for example, clear out all that junk food from your kitchen. Stock it up with healthy snacks instead.
Makes sense.
And don't underestimate the power of having a buddy someone to keep you accountable.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Having that support system makes a huge difference.
Tell a friend about your goals or join a group of people working towards similar changes. It's like having a built-in cheerleader in your corner.
All right, so we've got cue replacement, routine modification, environment design, and social accountability. What else should we add to this habit hacking toolkit?
Well, another key strategy, and this is a big one, is to focus on building systems and routines that support the habits you want.
Okay, tell me more about this systems approach.
Well, think of it as setting up your environment and your schedule in a way that kind of minimizes that reliance on willpower, and maximizes your chances of success.
Okay, I'm listening.
So let's say you want to make exercise a regular habit instead of relying on that willpower to drag yourself out of bed at 5 a.m. You could lay out your workout clothes the night before, prepare a healthy breakfast ahead of time, maybe create a playlist of your favorite music.
So it's like setting up a series of cues that naturally lead you into that desired behavior.
Exactly. And this can be applied to pretty much any habit you want to build.
And it's kind of like that meal prepping that a lot of people do, right?
Absolutely. You're eliminating that decision fatigue.
Yeah.
When you're tired, you just grab whatever's easiest.
Exactly.
But even with the best systems in place, we're human. We're going to have those setbacks.
Yeah.
Don't let one slip up derail your entire progress.
But what's the best way to handle those moments when we kind of fall back into those old patterns?
Be kind to yourself
Okay.
and focus on getting back on track as quickly as possible. Remember, it's a journey. It's not a destination.
Okay, so no beating myself up, just get back on track.
Exactly.
This is also helpful. I'm feeling more empowered to actually tackle those habits I've been putting off. But I have to ask, if so much of our behavior is driven by these habits, these subconscious patterns, does that mean we actually have less free will than we think? Or does understanding all this actually give us more control?
That is a great question, and one that's been debated for centuries. I think the answer is probably somewhere in between. It's a nuanced thing. On the one hand, it can be a little unnerving to realize just how much of our behavior is driven by these automatic patterns.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the very act of understanding these mechanisms, understanding that habit loop, the power of neuroplasticity, I think it gives us a new level of agency, almost like we're gaining access to the control panel of our own minds.
I love that analogy.
Right.
So we're not just passengers along for the ride. We can actually learn to steer the ship.
Exactly. By understanding how habits work, we can consciously choose which ones we want to cultivate and which ones we want to break free from.
Yeah.
We can become the architects of our own lives.
That's incredible, and it makes this whole deep dive even more exciting.
Absolutely. And we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore.
Well, I can't wait to dive in some more.
It's amazing when you think about it. Like, we can gain so much control over our lives just by understanding these simple mechanisms that are happening in our brains.
It's true. It's like we have all these incredible tools at our disposal, but we were never really given the instruction manual. But now we're starting to figure out how to use them to our advantage.
Yeah, and one of the biggest takeaways for me is that it's not about willpower alone.
Yeah.
It's really about building systems and environments that make it easier to stick to those good habits and harder to fall back into those old patterns.
I think that's where I've always struggled in the past. I would try to white knuckle my way through any kind of habit change, just relying on willpower to resist temptation. But that approach is just not sustainable in the long run.
Exactly. It's exhausting.
Yeah,
It's like you're trying to swim upstream against a really strong current.
that's a great analogy.
You might be able to do it for a little while, but you're going to get tired, and eventually you're probably going to give up.
So instead of fighting against the current stage, we need to learn how to work with it, create a flow that naturally carries us towards our goals.
Exactly, and that's where the power of systems comes in.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about how to do that.
Well, it's about designing your environment and your routines in a way that minimizes that reliance on willpower. So you're basically making the desired behavior the path of least resistance.
Okay, so give me some concrete examples. What does this system-based approach look like in real life?
Okay, so let's say you want to start a morning exercise routine.
Okay.
Instead of relying on your willpower to drag yourself out of bed at the crack of dawn,
Yeah.
you could try setting out your workout clothes the night before, preparing a healthy breakfast ahead of time. Little things like that.
And those little things make a difference.
They do. And even, create a playlist of your favorite music, something that pumps you up.
I love that it's like setting up a series of cues that just naturally lead into that desired behavior.
Exactly. And you can apply the same principle to any habit you want to build.
It's like setting yourself up for success.
Exactly. So if you want to eat healthier,
Yeah.
make sure your kitchen is stocked with healthy foods.
Get rid of all the junk food.
Get rid of the temptations. And if you want to read more, keep a book by your bed or download an audiobook,
So convenient.
Yeah, just make it easy on yourself.
So simple, but so effective.
And, I think the same strategy can be applied to breaking bad habits, too.
Oh, absolutely. So it's like we can hack the system.
Yeah, exactly.
So if I'm trying to reduce my social media use, I could log out of all my accounts, delete the apps from my phone, maybe even use one of those website blockers.
Right. You're basically putting obstacles in the path of that bad habit.
Make it harder to do.
Exactly. And the more effort it takes to engage in that behavior, the less likely you are to actually do it.
And that brings us back to willpower, right?
Well, yeah, it all kind of ties together, but don't forget about rewards.
Rewards. I thought we were talking about breaking bad habits.
We are, but rewards can actually be really powerful for both breaking bad habits and building good ones.
Okay, I'm listening.
So when we associate a behavior with a positive feeling, it strengthens those neural connections in our brains, making us more likely to repeat that behavior in the future.
So it's like positive reinforcement.
Exactly. So if you're trying to build a new habit, like exercising regularly, you could reward yourself with something you enjoy.
Right, like a nice relaxing bath.
Exactly. Or, a healthy smoothie or whatever
Right.
works for you.
A little treat for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And the same principle can be applied to breaking bad habits, too. So, for example, if you're trying to quit smoking,
Mm-hmm.
you could put the money you would have spent on cigarettes into a jar. And then once you reach a certain milestone, you can use that money to treat yourself to something special.
I love that idea.
Yeah, it's a good one.
So we're basically learning how to play the habit game.
Exactly. And the more we understand the rules of the game, the better players we become.
This is all so fascinating, and it's giving me a lot of hope that change is possible. But let's be realistic for a moment. Sometimes those old habits are going to try to creep back in, so what's the best way to handle those moments of weakness?
The most important thing is to be kind to yourself and not to get discouraged. Those setbacks, they're a normal part of the process.
They don't mean you've failed.
Exactly.
So what should we do when we find ourselves slipping back into those old patterns?
Just acknowledge it without judgment. Try to learn from it and then get right back on track. It's not about perfection, it's about progress.
So no beating ourselves up, just a little course correction and keep moving forward.
Exactly.
This is all so incredibly helpful, and I'm feeling so much more empowered to tackle those habits I've been wanting to change. But I have to ask this question that's been on my mind. If so much of our behavior is driven by these subconscious habits, does that mean we actually have less free will than we think? Or does understanding the science actually give us more control over our lives?
That is a question that has puzzled philosophers and scientists for centuries. And I think the answer is more nuanced than a simple yes or no. On the one hand, it can be a little unsettling to realize just how much of our behavior is driven by these automatic patterns that we may not even be aware of.
Right, like we're not fully in control.
Right. But on the other hand, the very act of understanding these mechanisms, becoming aware of that habit loop, the power of neuroplasticity, I think it gives us a new level of agency. It's like we're gaining access to the control panel of our own minds.
I love that analogy. So we're not just passengers along for the ride. We can actually learn to steer the ship.
Exactly. We can consciously choose which habits we want to cultivate and which ones we want to break free from. We can become the architects of our own lives.
That's so empowering, and it makes this whole deep dive even more exciting. I can't wait to keep learning more. But before we move on, I want to circle back to something you said earlier about setbacks being a normal part of the process.
Yeah.
What are some practical tips for dealing with those moments when we slip up and fall back into those old patterns?
Yeah, it really is a journey, and it's all about figuring out what works best for you.
It's interesting. We often think of habits as these like everyday things, kind of mundane. But when you really dive into the science behind them, it's pretty fascinating.
It really is. It's like we've been operating on autopilot for so long without even realizing, the power that we have to shape our own lives through these tiny little actions.
And the fact that we can literally change the structure of our brains just by consistently repeating a new behavior. I mean, that's both amazing and kind of daunting at the same time.
It's true. It's a big responsibility, but it's also incredibly empowering. We're not stuck with the habits we have. We can always choose to change and evolve.
Yeah, it's like we've been given this incredible gift, this neuroplasticity, and it's up to us to use it wisely.
Absolutely. And the best part is it's never too late to start. Our brains are constantly changing and adapting, so we can start building new, healthier habits at any age.
I love that. And it's encouraging because it means that we're always a work in progress.
Right. We're always learning and growing.
So it's not just about willpower and discipline. It's about understanding the science,
Mm,
the strategies and the incredible power of our own minds.
exactly. And being patient with ourselves along the way.
This whole conversation has really changed my perspective on habits. I used to see them as these rigid things, like set in stone, but now I see them as dynamic and changeable. We
Yeah.
can shape them.
Yeah, you're not a slave to your habits.
This has been so enlightening. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of myself and the potential I have to create positive change.
That's fantastic. And that's what it's all about, empowering ourselves to become the best versions of ourselves.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We explored the habit loop, the power of neuroplasticity, and a whole bunch of strategies for breaking those bad habits and building good ones.
And we talked about the importance of consistency, the power of systems, and being patient with ourselves when we face those inevitable setbacks, you know?
And we even touched on some pretty deep questions about free will and determinism.
Right. It's a fascinating topic. And I think ultimately what we've learned is that understanding the science of habit formation, it doesn't take away our sense of agency. I think it actually enhances it.
Yeah, because the more we understand about how these mechanisms work, the more we can make conscious choices about our behavior.
We're not just puppets of our habits. We can become the puppeteers.
This has been an incredible journey. I'm
Yeah.
feeling so inspired, and I'm ready to start putting all this knowledge into action.
That's great. And remember, start small, be consistent, and don't be afraid to experiment until you find what works best for you.
And to all our listeners out there, we encourage you to join us on this journey of habit transformation. Dive deeper into the science and start experimenting with these strategies in your own lives. You have the power to change your life one good habit at a time. And that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.